Well, the only other time my breath has been taken away like this before happened when I was driving through the hills and mountains of California. I lived in Oakland, California before I moved to Philadelphia, and I would sometimes find myself driving north or east or south to get to a hike or a friend's house or a retreat. In some parts of the land, you can drive around hillsides and you're surrounded by grassland and grazing cows on one side and a sparkling creek down below you on the other. In some parts of the land, you can drive around and see flat cropland out to one side and mountains rising up in the distance on the other. And sometimes you are driving through lush greenery on both sides, only to turn a corner and find a hillside that is decimated, scarred and scorched by wildfire that has torn across the land, leaving behind just spiky black stumps where once there was forest. It can arrive so suddenly that you gasp in surprise. The charred black remnants of those tree trunks showing you where each large tree once stood. The absence of the leaf canopy so stark that it almost feels like you can see the forest that was once there more clearly than you would have seen it when it was alive. The imprint of what was and what has been destroyed and what will never be again makes mortality feel far too close for comfort in those moments. The only time I can remember being winded by environmental devastation like that before was those wildfire scarred hillsides in California until this week. Because this week I went out to Cobbs Creek Park, which is a couple miles west of where I live, a few miles west of the church. And I saw the clear cutting that has taken place there. I've never seen the devastation of a battlefield in war, but walking around the muddy crest of the hill next to Indian Creek in the old Cobbs Creek golf course land felt something like picking my way through a battlefield on the day after a battle, at least the way the movies make out those old battlefields to feel like. There's dirt and mud, and you can tell that powerful forces have moved beneath your feet just recently. But the air is still and calm now. There are long, unmoving forms lying lifeless in piles on the ground, though you know their length used to be height. And it's hard to see clearly for some reason. There are tangled piles of thin branches scattered across the ground, stacked up like pools of mist rising in the early morning. The chopped down huge trunks showing you where each large tree once stood. The absence of a leaf canopy so stark that it makes you feel like you see the forest that was once there more clearly than you saw it in life. The imprint of what was and what has been destroyed and what will never be again makes mortality feel all too close. As I continued into the park, when I got closer, it was clear that many of the trees that had been cut down in the Cobbs Creek land out there were massive trees, 4 or 5 feet in diameter. One tree lying on its side came up to my chin when I was standing next to it. Rings were too numerous to easily count, although others have estimated that they've counted 80 to 100 rings, meaning the trees were 80 to 100 years old in some cases. What was once topsoil held in place by massive tree roots now lies in slippery patches threaded through with those marks that show where rivulets are already eroding the topsoil, or soil from the very top of the hill is rapidly washing down as silt into the creek itself. And if you look down, you see golf balls embedded in the silt. I looked down and I saw one, and when I reached down to pick it up, there was another just a few feet away, and another. I found 3 golf balls within, I don't know, a square yard. How many of you are familiar with this story, with what I'm talking about, the clear cutting of the Cobbs Creek Park? Hold on, I'm going to make sure I can see. How many of you are familiar with that? Some people, but not that many. I will say that I wasn't familiar with it until maybe about a month ago, when Kitty and her fiance Timothy told me about it. Somewhere between 90 and 120 acres of land, of public city parkland, has been clear cut out there, including lots of mature woodlands in Cobbs Creek Park. It's beginning to get some more public attention now, but the clear cutting itself happened, I think, on February 23rd or around that time this year, so about 2 months ago. And it was technically site preparation for the restoration and repair of the old Cobbs Creek and Carricung golf courses in West Philadelphia. So I'll say that I have lived in West Philadelphia for almost 6 years now, and I hadn't spent any time in this area before, besides driving by it. I recognized it from driving by, but that's it. So here's the background for those of you who don't know the area the way I didn't know the area. The Cobbs Creek Golf Course was built in 1916, and it has been said that it stood out in its early history for having been a racially integrated and women-friendly golf course during a time of segregation, and when most private golf clubs were open to white men only. Over the years, it has fallen into disrepair, and it was used for some other purposes as well over the past 100 years. It was officially closed as a golf course due to safety concerns in 2020, I think shortly after the pandemic. Neighbors have continued to use the area as a park and for walks in the woods, and local wildlife watchers have appreciated the area throughout this time for the deer and foxes that live there, and the birds, including at least 2 great horned owl nests that lived in 2 of the big, massive trees that were cut down. A number of years ago, the Cobbs Creek Foundation was created with the purpose to restore the golf course and create programs for Philly residents and youth around golf, and rehab the natural environment there, the creek and the wetlands, as well as some of the other land there. The city decided to lease them the land, which is valued at over $90 million, for $1 for 30 years, although the lease agreement means it could go up to 70 years. It's a public-private partnership, not actually something that's too unusual a way for the city to get for any city or any state to get an area of land rehabbed and restored. The neighborhood around the Cobbs Creek Golf Course is 89% Black. The median income is about $50,000 a year. 20% of the population in that area is below the poverty line. So on February 23rd, there was a clear cutting of 90 to 120 acres of the land, including all of these massive, massive mature trees, native species, many of which were healthy, and all of which certainly served as habitat to the many different kinds of wildlife that live in that area. They served as erosion and flood control in an area prone to really bad flooding. They served as a tree canopy in this city, which helps provide both cleaner air for the residents and reduce the heat island effect that happens in cities when there's so many buildings and so many people creating energy discharge. It means the city gets hotter. So having more trees mature trees helps the city cool down in the summers, which is so important in cities like ours. And of course, it was carbon storage. They say that it was maybe storage for up to, I think, 30,000 tons of carbon. And like I was, and like many of you were, it seems, the neighborhood was taken by surprise when this happened, when this clear cutting happened. And so neighbors and local activists and local journalists have started looking more into what happened. The investigation has brought up a whole bunch of stuff: illegal campaign contributions from the foundation to those who have responsibility or influence on making the lease happen or getting the permits passed. There's been a lack of fully appropriate permitting and planning being on file. There's questions about the financial structure and whether the deal is actually as good for the city as it seems like it should be. And I think that pretty much everyone would say that there hasn't been enough public process. Not only have there been sort of minimal meetings and maybe poorly attended, poorly publicized meetings, all of the meetings have happened after the permits to do the clear cutting were filed. So it certainly wasn't part of the community conversation to make this change. And so I've done a lot of research on this at this point, and I have a degree in environmental justice, and so I've been trying to figure out how to step back and figure out, like, what is the most important thing that has gone on? What is the most important thing for us to be reflecting on today in this thing that is happening in the backyard of our church home? And what has become clear to me is that this idea came primarily from wealthy white suburban folks, not from the neighborhood that surrounds the land. Funding and the foundation leadership mostly come from wealthy white suburban folks, not from the middle income folks in the neighborhood around the park. And you don't need to know statistics. I think pretty much all of us know that golf is predominantly a sport that caters to wealthier, whiter, and more male people. It's said that something like 80% of golfers are white, over 3/4 of them are men. The median household income is over 100,000, so twice what it is in this neighborhood. The plan is for it to cost $68 to pay. It will cost $68 for any of us here in Philadelphia to play an 18-hole game. And because it's reserved as a golf course means that you can't use it for anything else, because there's a danger of these flying golf balls hitting someone in the head. So there's no trails that are going to be part of the plan. There's no ability to have a picnic there. There's no ability to play catch with your kid. The environmental justice advocate in me is forced to ask the question, would this have happened in a primarily white neighborhood? And I think most of us know that it probably would not have. The human justice advocate in me has to ask, what did the community want and need this land to be? Did the community need this land to be a restored competitive golf course? Or might there have been other uses that the community would have wanted this land to be? What I know is that you can plant new trees, but you can't uncut old trees. It takes decades for trees to do for the environment and for our souls what those 80 to 100-year-old trees are able to do. Kahlil Gibran wrote in 1926, "Trees are poems that the earth writes upon the sky." Trees are poems that the earth writes upon the sky. We fell them down and turn them into paper, he writes, that we may record our emptiness. Trees are poems the earth writes upon the sky. We fell them down and turn them into paper that we might record our own emptiness. What I know is that looking out across that park felt like looking out across a battlefield, that there was grief and shock and a closeness of my own mortality in looking at the death of those massive, massive beings that had been felled after living more than twice my lifetime. What I know is that when we are in relationship with something, whether it's a tree in our neighborhood, whether it's a park, many of you mentioned the places in nature that you like to get away. We have relationships with our natural environment. And it's as true in our relationships with our environment as it is with our relationships with each other. That when we come into relationship, we stop seeing that which we are in relationship with as other, and we begin to see them as connected with us. We see them less as something that we can profit from, or less as something that is in our way, and more as someone or something to be fought for, someone to bind our fate to. In our reading, we say, "This we know, the earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. This we know. All things are connected like the blood which unites one family. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of the earth, the people, the children of the earth. Whatever we do to the web of life, we do to ourselves." When we come into relationship with nature, with trees, with one another, we begin to see something as part of us, part of our very being. We see it in its fullness. We fight for it rather than seeing how it might just be getting in our way. This is an idea that undergirds so much of Unitarian Universalism, and it undergirds all of the work we do as a congregation as we work with the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, which you're going to hear about in a few minutes from Sonia Dahl. It undergirds the work that we do with the Poor People's Campaign, who is having this massive march and meeting in our sanctuary Monday night. It undergirds the work that we do with the Power Interfaith Justice Coalition, and it undergirds what we do in this congregation ourselves. We are not just a Sunday morning congregation. We are a people bound by our covenant with one another. Our commitment to one another's spiritual growth in our small group ministries, our commitment to one another's material and emotional needs in our caring ministries, to the unfolding of our souls across the generations. When we are in relationship with one another, we reorient our priorities and our time and our energy. And so I have spent some time on the Cobbs Creek Foundation website, and surely there are some very good things that this organization is hoping to do and planning to do, things that will benefit this city and the people around it. But I also know that it's always important to look deeper than a pretty website or an idea that sounds good on its surface. Because even when we want to seek to move forward with an idea, it's important for us to engage deeply with one another, to connect with all of those who are impacted by whatever ideas we are trying to put forth, to connect with people who are going to benefit from it, and to honor the fullness of all that is happening within the idea and within the community that surrounds it. Instead of clear-cutting a forest to make way for a golf course that maybe its neighbors didn't want or need, we should have had a conversation about what our neighbors did want and need in that area, and how we could meet those needs in a more full and more meaningful way. I've struggled to figure out what the call to action is in this service today. You cannot uncut trees. But here's where I am. I know that since people have been digging more deeply into what happened and what should have happened with this organization, the more that people have been spending time reading the lease and the permits, getting to know who has been involved with the conversations and who has been left out. The process is changing. More people are coming to the public meetings. The Arts Commission, which is responsible for some of the permitting of the buildings, has asked deeper questions than had been asked before since this story has come to light. And what I know is that the lease with this organization requires that they engage in what are called best faith efforts to take care of the land. And though the land has obviously, sorry, I lost my microphone. Though the land has obviously not been treated with best faith, we have an opportunity now, and I would say an obligation, to hold them accountable for reaching a best faith result with the city and with the permitting processes, with the community, and with the land itself. We have a chance to hold our leaders accountable and to dig more deeply into our relationships with one another, our relationships with nature, and our relationships with those who would lead us. Trees are poems that the earth writes upon the sky. We fell them down and turn them into paper that we might record our emptiness. When we come into relationship with each other, when we come into relationship with nature, it transforms us. It changes our priorities, helps us see that nothing, in fact, is other from us, that we are all interconnected, interdependent with one another, and that we must fight for one another and for the land on which we live. Because, my friends, what do we owe this earth on which we live? We owe it everything. May it be so, and amen.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abbey Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abbey just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.